Alright guys, you're listening to Reading with Nick, the Reddit edition. Today we're focusing on an Ask Reddit thread with a rather spooky focus. The title is Scariest or Strangest Things You've Seen in a National Park, and it was a hell of a lot of fun to read through. We bounce between benign frights and genuinely terrifying scenarios. Let's get right into it. Once I was driving into Yosemite at 4 a.m. Saw something in the road as I came around a corner and slammed on my brakes. It turned out to be a fucking wolf. Several years later, I mentioned this to someone offhand, and they said Yosemite didn't have any wolves. I looked it up, and they have exactly one wolf in the park. I realized I nearly plowed through Yosemite's one single wolf. I'm very glad I managed not to. Saw a toad that looked like it weighed 10 pounds. It was illogically huge. It stayed still and just looked at me. I just carefully went on my way in silence. Over the night, I could hear it off in the distance from my tent. I was chilling in a hammock and my family started yelling at me to run away. It turns out there was a bear right near me. I slowly walked away and the bear ate some berries by the hammock. Unlawful Duckling says it's worth walking away if the bear isn't running from you. A bear that doesn't run from people is very dangerous. Head Mathematician says, I was spacing out, staring at the ground, feeling a moment of peace and serenity. I'm looking down at the ground and see a 1 foot by 1 foot furry claw, about a foot away. I look up and see a brown bear walking right past me like I didn't exist. I was too startled and shocked to be scared or scream. I did what you're not supposed to do. I reflexively bolted. This must have worked in such close quarters because the bear went running in the opposite direction. I think it was a sudden energy to bolt that must have put off the bear's energy to run. I think the sudden and panicked bolt, the energy, threw the bear's energy off. It worked in my case. I could not believe what I saw. My friend and I would go camping pretty often near a pond in a big clearing that pretty much nobody knew about. We had never seen signs of anyone else being there and it's hard to get to. It is on the edge of a national park/forest in California. One morning, we pulled the truck up to the area we parked before the hike. We see 2 mountain lions having sex. That alone was enough for us to just call the trip a loss and turn back. But we decided to stick around for a bit to watch the lions. They finished up their business pretty quickly and kind of just hung around the area, so it was cool to see them. After about 10 minutes, they perk up and they're on alert. We have the windows up, obviously, so we can't see or hear anything. They get scared and run off, and from the direction they ran away from, 3 deer come running through with a big-ass bear chasing them. We haven't been back to that spot since. A pair of female cops fishing a pond with a grappling hook on a line, trying to drag in an arm that was sticking out of the muck. The scariest was a group of tourists, I'm guessing, at the Hoh Rainforest in the Olympic National Park, who thought it was a good idea to take pictures posing with huge elk. Some people were even making their kids go over and pose with these wild animals. I'm pretty sure it was during the elk mating season too. We and other people shouted at them to not get close to the elk, but they didn't listen to us. Luckily, nothing happened. 1990 to 1991. My 5-foot-tall, English-born grandmother got out of our car in Yellowstone National Park to snap a photo of a bear and its cubs. She got between the cubs and the mother bear, while my family screamed at her from the other car. There are plenty of signs, stories, and videos explaining why it's bad to try and pose with animals. While sitting around waiting for Old Faithful to burst, I saw a dude 10 feet behind a prone to bison sit down and pull out a pair of bongos. His girlfriend was recording it. I couldn't comprehend the stupidity. This happened to my mom when she was pregnant with me. She was out jogging in some forest in Alaska, something that she would do daily. After some time, she notices people frantically attempting to get her attention. She had headphones on, so she couldn't hear them. Eventually, she stops to ask them what was up. They told her that they had been trying to get her attention for a while. A big grizzly bear had been chasing after her on her jog, but it eventually stopped for whatever reason. A buddy and I were on a camping trip in the Padre Canyon, outside Fort Collins, Colorado. It was late in the season, so all of the campgrounds were closed. We found a random spot off of a random road. Both of us have a ton of experience and had camped all over Colorado and Utah, but something about this particular spot was just off. Almost immediately, we find a blanket wrapped around a deceased skeletal animal. We assumed it was just a pet that someone had thrown out, but it set the mood. We went hiking, climbed up a few hills, and came across an abandoned tent wrapped up in a tree. I was certain we were going to find a body in it, but it was just filled with notebooks and a sleeping bag. We start hiking down the hill and end up walking down the side, very steep. As we're traversing down, we're hit with the smell of death. Nestled into a tree on the side of a very steep hill is a small towel with something clearly inside of it. We leave it be and hike down. This is probably 200 to 300 feet up the side of a steep hill, with the towel in a tree, facing the top of the hill. It was clearly intentionally put there. We down some bourbon, build up some courage, and hike back up. Grab a stick and open up the towel. Inside, a very recently deceased owl. Somehow, some way, someone had killed this owl, wrapped it in a towel, hiked up a steep hill off a random mountain road, and stuck it beside a tree. We started a fire, slammed the bourbon, and got the fuck out of there in the morning. A bear sniffing around trying to get inside of our tent. There was no food inside but us. My uncle is a trucker. He was once going up the mountains in South Queensland and had to stop on the side of the road to take a leak. This was around 11 p.m. at night. It was quiet except for the occasional other car passing. Oh, and the giant thumping noise coming from the trees. Emus don't go up that high, and if it were a kangaroo, it would have run off before being heard. Same as a wallaby. Cassowaries don't go that far south, so it was either a very fat mountain goat or our version of Bigfoot. These are my uncle's words, not mine. When I was a kid, maybe 10, my parents took our family of 4 to Mark Twain National Forest. We did not go to a campground. For whatever reason, we arrived around dusk and we had to hurry to set up camp. Soon after, we discovered that we had forgotten a lantern and it became very dark. My stepfather was an alcoholic and a mean drunk to boot, so there was a lot of yelling. And instead of lighting a campfire, we just went to bed. As we all lay there, trying to sleep, we begin to hear dead leaves rustle in the distance, as if someone were walking through the forest. Time was passing slowly as we listened to the sound getting closer and closer. My sister, 12, my mother, my drunk stepdad, and myself were petrified, hoping that since we have no lights, and because the person walking through the forest didn't have a flashlight, we may avoid notice. A few moments later, as the sound of shuffled walking was within just a few yards, the stranger stepped on a twig and it snapped. My father belted out a blood-curdling scream and my mother shrieked, "Let's get out of here!" All 4 of us bolted out of the tent toward the car, my brave parents in the lead. After a few terrifying moments, we reached our Honda Civic hatchback, and we took off for home. We never went back for our things, and I hate camping to this day. I am 43 and I still dream about this. Was camping and there was a stream with a concrete bridge or a spillway. Me being the fish and wildlife nerd I am, I went to the creek to catch darters and crawfish. I was walking back when I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down and see an almost 4-foot copperhead, carrying a 3-foot decapitated water snake with it. I was camping in the Amazon rainforest here in Brazil, and I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to pee really bad. I walked a little bit far away from the camp so I wouldn't wake anyone up, and lowered my pants and began to pee. I'm a girl, so I kind of sat down, but without touching the ground for obvious reasons. There was only the moonlight and everything was really fucking dark, and I was really nervous when I felt and heard something walk up behind me. Something very close. I don't know what it was, but it felt big, and I was already thinking that I would die right there, half naked, and no one would even know what happened. Anyway, I finished as soon as I could and ran back to the tent shaking. I still wonder about what kind of animal or person that was, but I was in the middle of the Amazon and really it could be anything. I saw a large, deep rectangular pit in the middle of a national forest. It looked like someone was about to be buried. I carefully walked away as quietly as I could, afraid that I'd fall into a different pit with a body in it. The mind can play some mean tricks on a person. 2 park rangers emerged from the bushes while a friend and I were smoking a bowl in Acadia National Park. What would have been a slap on the wrist became a felony charge because it was on federal property. Luckily, we were teenagers, so it was expunged from our records after a few years. I desperately still wish that I had the letter that arrived at my parents' house with the header reading, "The United States of America versus my name." Sorry for the novella. I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided not to. It was off-season and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided I needed to get in that water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out in the direction I would need to leave, and started hiking through thick brush, down an embankment, to the edge of the water. There was no path, and it was a pretty rugged area. It was mid-fall, and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming. I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my bra and underwear. I had a nice swim, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I knew I was in the middle of nowhere. And after about 5 minutes, that creepy feeling was enough for me to want to head back, and so I started to climb out. Turned my back to the other side of the river and walked toward my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I turned around, there was a big, tall man standing in plain view, just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on his embankment than I was on mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he had been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other, me in frozen terror for what felt like forever, when all of a sudden he frantically took off in the direction of the footbridge leading across the water. I grabbed my car key, tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything and went running for my life. Through the thick brush and blackberries, barefoot, in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge toward me rapidly. I got to my car and flung my door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back, and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through the blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking, and crying. Had I hesitated for literally 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing the story out again, all these years later, I'm starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it. I will never ever go back to that area. Since that moment, I always bring a hiking buddy with me when I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for my life. I have had many years of therapy, and that experience is still as vivid as the day it happened. Well, that was a fun and rather spooky read. I'm very much a novice when it comes to production and audio recording, but I hope I've entertained a few people with this. So, thank you for watching and have a good night.